For weeks, this election race appeared to be stuck in neutral. Support for the party leaders barely budged. Now, though, the ground beneath them appears to be shifting. CBC Polls analyst Eric Grenier is here to explain why. Eric, what is happening nationally right now?
Well, nationally, we're not seeing a lot of movement in the overall numbers. So let's take up the poll tracker's national polling averages. We're still seeing a very close race between the Conservatives and the Liberals, at least in the national numbers. The New Democrats do seem to be picking up a little bit. The Greens as well are in a bit better position, but it's the Bloc Québécois that has really been picking up. You don't see it in the national numbers, but in Quebec it's made a big difference, and it makes a big difference in the seat count.
Yeah, so let's go to the seats right away, because that is where that big shift is happening.
Yeah, let's take a look at the seat projections right now. We have both the Liberals and the Conservatives well short of 170 seats needed for a majority government. They're now both sub 140. And we now have the Bloc Québécois in a position to win maybe around 33 seats in Quebec. The New Democrats are now standing at about 24 and the Greens at 4. So we're seeing that these two parties are now really in minority territory. And if we look at the probabilities of what kind of outcome this would produce, it's very low likely that you'd have a majority government, really looking at about 4-1 that it would be a minority, or 3-1, I should say, that it would be a minority rather than a majority government. That is a big shift. It was, before this, it was much more closer. The possibility of majority government was much more likely.
And is this all due to the Bloc in Quebec? And if so, can you sort of explain or show us more about what's happening in that province?
Yeah, the NDP's picked up a little bit nationwide, but it is in Quebec where the changes have really been really significant. Let's take a look at the Quebec polling averages. The Liberals still leading, but they're now down to just under 34%. The big change has been the Bloc Québécois. They're now up to 27%. They were at 19% at the beginning of this campaign. You've seen the Conservatives, they've dropped now to 16.5%. Their support has just been dropping. That's below where they were in 2015. The New Democrats at 11% and the Greens at 8%. But let's look at the trend line in Quebec, because that is where you really see the story. This little line here, right there, that's the TVA debate. And you can see that since then, that's when things were shaking up. The Liberals have been dropping after a little bit of an uptick, and the Bloc Québécois has really been taking off, the Conservatives going down. This changes really everything right now, because before the Liberals were counting on Quebec to give them a majority government, or at least get them close to it. Now, with the Bloc taking as many as 30, 35 seats off the table, it's going to be really tough for them.
Wow, lots to watch for. Thank you, Eric. The CBC's polls analyst, Eric Grenier.
Actually, it's kind of a compliment. I kind of acknowledge the fact that in the last few days, for some reasons that belong to them only, most leaders have decided to be somewhat more aggressive against the Bloc Québécois. It might mean that we have become again a significant player in politics, and that we have gained respect from and for Quebec.
Well, the reasons why party leaders perhaps are attacking the Bloc Québécois more are becoming clear. CBC Polls analyst Eric Grenier explained earlier in the show there's a shift in the polls, and that shift is favoring the Bloc in Quebec. So much so that the Bloc is in a position to win more than 30 seats, and that could, of course, dim the Liberal and Conservative chances of a majority government. If the Bloc is really back, what will it mean for the 5 other parties? Welcome back to Power and Politics and the Power Panel. Jason Markisoff, Vicky Machama, Marty Patrickman, and Marika Walsh. Marty, I'll start with you. So Eric's poll tracker this morning, it was my first indication. I mean, we'd all been talking about the potential for the Bloc to capitalize on the momentum there. Clearly, they're now sitting in second place in the poll tracker, 33.6% for the Liberals, 27.1% support for the Bloc. And the seat translation is the key thing there. 30 seats, it makes it the odds of a majority government very slim compared to before. What is happening in Quebec?
That's a very good question. And I think behind that support for the Bloc too, you got to realize too is that their support is even more efficient, because you can pretty much strip 95 to 100% of anybody that doesn't speak French out of that vote. So that vote translates very well for them. Look, it's a fascinating thing. A month and a half ago, it was the Liberals dominating pretty much everything, with the Conservatives grabbing a few seats in and around Quebec City, and then Bloc taking doing a little piecemeal. They come up a little bit, even a little bit. It throws everything into play. Just to give you an idea and refer to my notes, so that you have these three-way races across the provinces potentially. So like ridings like Jonquière, which are held by the NDP, less than 7 points between the NDP and the Bloc, with the Liberals in the middle. Ridings like Quebec City, the riding of Quebec, which is held by the Liberals, where there's 5,000 votes between the first place Liberals and the fourth place Bloc. Ridings like Beauport-Limoilou, which is a conservative riding where there's something like, I think it's less than 5,000 votes between the first place and the third place. These places, everything is, as they say in French, serré. It's very, very close. So even a tiny fluctuation in terms of support throws off the status quo completely.
Jason, what do you think the implications are for the last 9 days of the campaign, if in fact you're fighting for minority, if the Liberals and the Conservatives are now fighting for minority territory?
Well, given the volatility that Marty talks about, I think you're going to see more and more people bending their rhetoric toward Quebec. Last night in the French language debate, we heard Justin Trudeau speaking sounding more like François Legault, the Premier, on Energy East, the pipeline, than we have heard in quite a while. So they're really going to be jostling for that. It means they're not going to be jostling as aggressively for votes elsewhere. Those are the really volatile votes where they're going to see potential for gain. You're going to see Andrew Scheer trying to scramble to save what he has. You could see the NDP just write it off entirely. And in terms of all this talk about conditions for minority governments, with a very large bloc contingent, as we saw during the Harper minority years, it pretty much blows out of the water any firm talk of a major coalition holding the balance of power. We're talking probably in a territory of very much a brokerage politics, where you're going to need the bloc on some issues. Going to get if the Liberals win a plurality, they're going to need the Conservatives on some issues. Maybe NDP and Greens won't have enough of it. So it's really going to, I think, tamp down any coalition discussion, because nobody wants to form a coalition with the Bloc traditionally, but will get people talking as much as they can about creating Quebec.
And Mr. Blanchet, Vicky, last night following the French leaders' debate was pretty explicit. He was asked about that idea of some sort of coalition or whatever the term was, and he said, nope, not going to work with the Conservatives, not going to work with the Liberals. I'm only going to work on behalf of Quebec. It's going to be issue by issue, and that's the way I look at it.
I mean, that'll be fascinating to see how it actually breaks down. I'm really glad Marty mentioned those numbers where it's super, super close, especially in ridings, and it's super close for all parties, which I think it's something that they've all known, which is why we've seen them be fairly muted about Bill 21. That they're keenly aware that for every single seat that the NDP, the Liberal, the Conservatives have, they have a bloc contender who is going to push them harder and push against them, and those are seats that they might possibly lose. As for Mr. Blanchet's promise not to work with any particular party, those are questions we answer on October 22nd.
There's another factor here, and that's the NDP as well, which we've seen the popularity of Jagmeet Singh increase, and now it has translated, it appears, to the party on a larger scale, particularly not in Quebec, obviously, but outside of Quebec, particularly in BC. There's a lot of pressure coming at the Liberals right now from multiple flanks.
Exactly. In BC, and I think even in downtown Toronto, it's from the NDP, and in Quebec, it's from the Bloc. And so I think that what Marty mentioned in the Bloc previously about how Trudeau hasn't spoken very much about Singh today, I think that's going to be one of those things to watch. How much more do they decide to attack the NDP, and how? Because that will really be the tell of what is happening in the numbers they're seeing behind the scenes, which of course are even more in depth and even more granular than the numbers that we see. So I think that's going to be the thing to watch, and also where they go. Are they going into ridings, and this I mean the Liberals, are they going into ridings that they already have and they're trying to protect, or are they being offensive and going into places that they think they can still win over?
I imagine, given, Marty, the favorables for Jagmeet Singh, it would be a risky move for the Liberals to start going too hard on him, at least personally, or on his leadership. But I do imagine the same thing we heard from Mr. Trudeau in the press conference not long ago, or in the scrum with reporters not long ago, will be almost punctuated. Like, the message will be, it's us or the Conservatives. If you vote for the NDP, you're not throwing your vote away, but that will be the insinuation, right? Like, if you want to defeat the Conservatives, you're going to have to go with us.
It's already started. As you mentioned, if Jagmeet Singh was didn't have such personal favorable numbers, dare I say, if Jagmeet Singh was Tom Mulcair at this point, it would be a different story. But you're right; they'll go less after the candidate and more after the electoral math. It's a classic Liberal conceit. It's playing the Quebec wing of the. Pardon me, not the Quebec wing. The Quebec Liberal Party did that for years and years and years, saying if you vote for anybody but us, you're voting for the Parti Québécois, you're voting for separation. It's essentially the same shell game that they're playing with the NDP.
And
yeah, go ahead.
And I think that's what we will see. I think we will see. We've already heard Trudeau say, a vote for the NDP would be a vote for the Conservatives. He was talking about that in the debate last night about the Bloc Québécois. I mean, what's ironic about all of this is that if he'd gone forward with the electoral reform, people who had voted for him, who traditionally voted for the NDP, wouldn't be making these same decisions again this time around.
I just wonder, Jason, how the message will resonate with voters. Like, I don't know, I have no idea, but it's sort of appealing to, people who are okay with voting strategically. Whereas, I mean, at least among a lot of young people I talk to, they're eager to vote their conscience. They're happy that they have additional options.
Yeah.
Some will. I mean, it depends on how much you ratchet up the fear factor in the rival opposition. I mean, Harper was a major fear factor last time. Scheer doesn't engender that much fear. And that's why you hear Trudeau always tying him to Doug Ford, to Stephen Harper, to Jason Kenney, and as much as that plays to places. I mean, Marty talked earlier about efficiency. In a way, it's efficient for him to knock the NDP and the Conservatives by attacking the Conservatives, because then he said, then he creates that binary option. Don't vote for them. And the other thing that we're starting to hear, especially as the Bloc rises, is this, and I'm hearing this murmurs on social media and from some Liberal circles, is that we could have the ability potentially for the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois to hold the balance of power. So we'll have the Cutters and the Separatists. And I think if these trends hold, I think you're going to hear that trend increasingly in the last week from Trudeau and co.
Vicky, last word to you.
I mean, I think what's interesting in all this sort of electoral math is the votes that have already been cast. We know that young people on campuses got to vote, and they voted at twice the rate that they did in 2015. We know that people are going to be voting over this weekend, and people might not care at this point, at least on this Friday, as either they head home from campus or as they show up to their parents' houses and they start to influence their parents and their community around them, and they go to vote this weekend, whether or not the fact of a late release from the Conservatives will have an impact. And so I think there are operational changes that are going to make this slightly different. And the question is always the big one of whether young people will come out. You can get them scared, but can you get them to the polling stations?
Yeah, good question. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.